Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently we are in Deuteronomy chapter 7. And Moses is going to give Israel a reality check. In other words, in essence, he's going to say, y'all not all that. Alright, but let's get into it. Excuse me. Deuteronomy chapter 7. He says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and he drives out many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgahites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and powerful than you. So understand, this is God telling them this. Now, one quick note. The difference between God telling them this and in 40 years previous when they said that we can't enter the land was that they did not include God. God is telling them these nations are more powerful than you. But the difference that you have me on your side, which they, of course, the first generation did not believe. Verse 2. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you and defeat them, you must completely destroy them, make no treaty with them, or show them no mercy. This is probably hard for a lot of people, the severity of the judgment of these nations. They were to completely destroy them. And this is the argument you hear today when people say, well, God, how the contradiction in the Bible that God ordered the execution of women and children. But they're not going to tell you is, for one, God is God and he can do that. But beyond that, how incredibly wicked these nations were. So just like now, I'll give you an example when we look at what's going on in the world today between Russia and Ukraine. People love and have mercy and on Ukraine, but Russia is bad. There are people even saying that the leaders should be taken out. Now, the reason why they say that is because of what they are going to say that Russia, how evil Russia is acting. And they have no feelings about saying that, the leaders should be taken out. Well, these nations were worse. The violence, everything were worse. And so, God is saying when you go into this land, we're going to drive these nations out. You are to destroy them. They are not to be left remaining. Why? 1, they are evil, wicked people. Verse 3, do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will swiftly destroy you. We've already seen, we got a taste of this when Balak, the Moabites, seduced the sons of Israel, caused them to sin, caused them to fall into idolatry. We already seen this. And this is, again, the chief reason why God is saying, don't marry them. Don't marry their customs. Don't follow their customs. Verse 5, instead, this is what you ought to do to them. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their asterisk poles, and burn up their carved images. Now, for the most part, they won't do this. Verse 6, for you are a holy people belonging to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be his own possessions out of all the peoples of the face of the earth. So this is the difference. Israel was chosen as a nation. Now, and always keep the context of this as a nation. The Lord was devoted to you and chose you. Not because you were more numerous than all the peoples, for you were the fewest of all people, but because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your fathers. He brought you out with a strong hand and redeemed you from the place of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now this is why he chose them. In other words, it was the covenant that God made with Abraham. Know that Yahweh, your God, is God, the faithful God who keeps his gracious covenant loyalty for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. And remember, they've seen his mighty acts and his mighty works. Verse 10. But he directly pays back and destroys those who hate him. He will not hesitate to directly pay back those who hate him. So keep the commandments, the statutes and ordinances that I'm giving you to follow today. If you listen to and are careful to keep these ordinances, the Lord your God will keep his covenant loyalty with you, as he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will bless your descendants and produce the produce of your land, your grain, new wine, oil, the young of your herds, and the newborns of your flocks, in the land he swore to your fathers he would give you. Now you think about all of the economical problems we have, but just think Israel had God on their side, blessing their land, blessing their economy, blessing everything, if they would just keep his commands. Verse 14, you will be blessed above all peoples, and there will be no infertile male or female among you or your livestock. The Lord will remove all sickness from you. He will not put on you all the terrible diseases of Egypt that you know about, but he will inflict them on all who hate you. So, what a wonderful promise that most of the generations will not get. Verse 16, you must destroy all the peoples the Lord your God is delivering over to you, and not look on them with pity. Do not worship their gods, for that will be a snare to you, or a trap. Verse 17, if you say to yourselves, these nations are greater than I, how can I drive them out? Now remember that first generation did say that. Verse 18, do not be afraid of them. Be sure to remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and all of Egypt. The great trials that you saw, the signs and wonders, the strong hand and outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. The Lord your God will do the same to all these people in fear. And this is why he was telling them that they should always rehearse and tell their children, talk about the goodness of God, that these things would be on their minds. Okay? The Lord your God, verse 20, will also send a hornet nets against them, and all of the survivors of those hiding from you perish. Don't be terrified of them, for the Lord your God, a great and awesome God, is among you. Later on, we're going to see when we get to Samuel, the first king Saul, that the people will come to him and says, we want to be like the other nations. And that will be one of the saddest statements from Israel. We want to be like the other nations, especially when God here is promising them, one, he will protect them, bless them, prosper them, and they want to be like the other nations. Verse 22, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you little by little. You will not be able to destroy them all at once, otherwise the wild animals will become too numerous for you. The Lord your God will give them over to you, and to throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. Verse 24. All right, verse 24. He will hand their kings over to you, and you will wipe out their names under heaven, and no one will be able to stand against you, and you will annihilate them. Now, I wanted to say this, that notice he said that they were going to, take the lands little by little, not all at once. So sometimes if people get impatient with God, this is just kind of one of the reasons why sometimes he doesn't act the way we say, well, how come it's taking so long, Lord? Well, we can kind of see in this case, there is a reason for that. Verse 25, you must burn up the carved images of their gods. Don't cover the silver or gold of the image and take it for yourself, or else you will be ensnared by it. for it is abhorrent to the Lord your God. Now, and another reason too that they should have done is that to come to faith to know, you know what, God is blessing us here. We don't have to covet this. We don't have to have this because God is the one who is blessing us. Verse 26. You must not bring any abhorrent thing into your house, or you will be set apart for destruction like it. Now we'll see there's a couple examples of this coming up in Joshua. You are to utterly detest and abhor it because it is set apart for destruction. All right, let's go to chapter 8. You must carefully follow every command I'm giving you today so that you may live and increase and may enter and take possession of the land the Lord swore to your fathers. Remember that the Lord your God led you on an entire journey these 40 years in the wilderness so that he might humble you and test you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you by letting you go hungry. Then he gave you manna to eat, which you or your father had not known, so that you might learn that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now let me stop because you may certainly know this verse. When in the wilderness, when Jesus appeared after his baptism and it was driven into the wilderness, and Satan tempted him and said, if you are the Son of God, he said, make this stone bread. And he says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God. He's quoting this verse here. But we also can see the context in which the meaning comes from. That we don't have to say, well, God, if you really God, how come you don't make this stone bread? We don't have to test God because God has already said, I will take care of you. Verse 4, your clothing did not wear out and your feet did not swell these 40 years. Now that is something, right, when your clothes don't wear out. But they were also a testament to God's grace on them. Verse 5, keep in mind that the Lord your God hath been disciplining you just as a man disciplines his son. Now again, we will see this later as the writers quote some of these very verses right here. It says, don't be discouraged at the discipline of the Lord, because what? The purpose of the discipline is a reflection of love. Verse 6, so keep the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and water, springs and deep water sources flowing in both valleys and hills, a land of wheat, barley, figs, vines, figs, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without shortage, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron, and from whose hills you will mine copper. Now this is kind of, again, notice these promises that they are receiving from God, right? How he would bless their land. So the bigger question is, why will they continue to turn away from God? Why would they continue to fall into idolatry? All right, verse 10. When you eat and are full, you will praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you don't forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commands, the ordinances and statutes I'm giving you today. When you eat and are full and build beautiful houses to live in, and your herds and your flocks grow large, and your silver and gold multiply, and everything else you have increase. Be careful that your heart doesn't become proud and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Now, this is so true in every kind of context we can think about. Think about when things are good, do we forget God? And even from the perspective, do we forget that it is God who empowers us? Do we forget that it is God who keeps us? You know, verse 15. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, a thirsty land where there was no water. He brought water out of the flint like rock for you. He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers had not known, in order to humble and test you, so that in the end he might cause you to prosper. In other words, these tests that sometimes seem like they seem like bad things. They seem like trials. They seem like, when will it end? Was actually working in them. The test to trust God. Verse 17, when you say to yourself, my power and my own ability have gained this wealth for me. But remember that the Lord your God gives you power to gain wealth in order to confirm his covenant he swore to your fathers as it is this day. Now, keep this in mind. He is talking to Israel, the nation of Israel, and these promises only work in the sense in their land, the land that God has given them. Verse 19. If you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods to worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will perish. Like the nations the Lord is about to destroy before you. You will perish if you do not obey the Lord your God. So in this is a wonderful promise. A wonderful promise, yet, and at the same time, a stern warning to Israel not to forget. But of course, this is under the law of Moses. Their sin nature is the problem. The sin nature is why they keep falling. And but it is a wonderful command. I want to also say this, that be careful about teachings where there have been teachers, prosperity teachers, faith teachers, that have taken this verse and have extracted it out of its context and said that, that from an individual perspective, you can claim this blessing, claim this scripture. So, no, it wasn't meant for it to be used that way. In other words, God was making the promise to Israel in the land that he was giving them. So that it wasn't designed for Israel to prosper in Egypt. It wasn't designed for Israel to prosper in any other nation. Nor was it necessarily speaking to us as people try to make it. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't bless us, and that doesn't mean that God doesn't keep us in his grace and his favor. I'm just saying you can't use that verse as a solid promise to stand on and think you're going to prosper as he was giving it to Israel. All right, guys. Chapter 9 in our next study. I'll see you then.